Our speaker for tonight is Cathy Callopy, excuse me, Cathy. She has worked at Dinsmore Homestead for the last 24 years. During that period, she has been transcribing letters, researching documents, and organizing education programs. She has taught history courses at NKU, Xavier, and UC part-time while working at Dinsmore. So please welcome Cathy Callopy.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm going to talk about Patty Flandrau Selmes. I was told you don't get a lot of women in some of the topics, so I thought this might be a good one. So Patty was born in Boone County. Paper up here because I have a lot of quotes. So I love we have over 90,000 pages of letters, journals, and receipts. So I do love throwing in lots of quotes. Little far.
Got it.
Need longer arms.
Figure out how to do this. Is it dancing? Space bar? No? There you go.
A farm that was once almost 900 acres. The foundation, the Dinsmore Homestead Foundation, now owns somewhere around 50. But we do have all original structures. Not all the structures that were there in 1860 or 1880, but everything on the property is original. We are also lucky to have
You should write your own key for write her down.
Where's the book we're going to be on? Okay, yeah.
I'm just going to use the arrows.
Yeah.
Everything in the house is original to the family. And it's not just original to the family, it's pretty much where it was when the family left the property in the 1920s. So the house was empty for 40 years. Harry Roseberry, who lived across the driveway, would allow a cleaning woman to go in, clean around things, and for 40 years everything stayed pretty much where it was when the last member of the family lived there full time. So we do like to brag about that. So, in 1861, in the summer, Isabella Dinsmore Flandrau traveled from Minnesota to Boone County to give birth to her first daughter. In the same room she had lived in as a child. When the girl was born, she named her after her mother, Martha McComb Flandrau. Her nickname was always Pat, Patty, or Patsy. After the age of 11, Patty never lived full-time in Boone County, but she always spent part of her year there, and as Julia got older, she spent more and more of her time in Boone County. When she died in 1923, she listed Boone County as a residence. I call her a Boone County girl because most of her formative years were at Boone County. We recently came across a letter that was written about 13 years after Julia died by her half-brother, Charlie Flandrau. He wrote, "I wish you would tell me just," oh, he's writing to his brother. "I wish you would tell me just when it was that the Dinsmore family became the frantic professional Southerners our branch has always been since I knew them. I was amazed to have you tell me that they had originated in Vermont or New Hampshire or some such Yankee locality. Patty has always battened on the Southern bunk." So I'm not sure exactly what he meant by the Southern bunk, but when I read this, I was curious what sort of Southern qualities Patty had and whether or not it helped her, as he seemed to insinuate. She does fit the stereotypical Southern belle idea. She was flirtatious, she was elitist, she was proud of her bloodline, she loved horses and was very good at riding them. Likely she had a Southern accent, and she was very used to having African Americans do work for her, like her Aunt Julia. How did these traits help her? That's what I'm going to explore. So Patty's parents, Isabella and Charles Flandrau, were first cousins on her mother's side of the family, so Martha Dinsmore's side of the family. James Dinsmore has a book in his library entitled Intermarriage. Half of it is on stock animals and half of it is on humans. I'm sure he read it, but it doesn't seem like he paid much attention. I think he knew this was a bad marriage, not a good idea, but his wife, Martha McComb, had several first cousin marriages on her side of the family. So I think she swayed his opinion. Martha Dinsmore, Patty's grandmother, was born in New York City to Alexander and Jane McComb. Their house, which was called the McComb's Mansion, was used as a presidential residence when New York City was the capital. Even though he did spend a few months in debtor's prison, Alexander McComb's children did manage to marry into very well-to-do New York families, like the Livingstons and the DePasters and the Beekmans. Let's see. When James and Martha married, her brother was commanding general of the U.S. Army. So the name had a lot of panache back then, not anymore. James Dinsmore did not quite have the relationships, the wealthy relationships that Martha did. He definitely married up. His father was a tavern keeper. But he did have 3 relatives who became governors of New Hampshire. So he wasn't, the name Dinsmore wasn't totally unknown. His uncle Silas, who lived right on the river in Boone County, had spent George Washington's last Christmas with him in 1798. So there were connections on the Dinsmore side, just not the wealth that you had on the McComb side. Isabella was the eldest of 3 daughters to James and Martha. In 1851, the youngest daughter, Susan, died in a drowning accident. In 1859, 7 days after Isabella and Charles were married, Mrs. Dinsmore died from tuberculosis. So when Patty was born at the Dinsmore farm, the only people really there were James. The only people in the immediate family were James and his daughter Julia, the middle child. Julia was to inherit the farm when James died. There were 2 orphaned cousins living there and a woman named Isabella Hill, who for some reason came there in the 1840s and stayed until 1879 when she married a neighbor. So we haven't quite figured out why, but that's something I hope we'll do in the future. Isabella complained when she got to Minnesota about the lack of servants there. However, the Civil War, she did not see the Civil War as a fight over slavery, and slavery didn't really affect her in any way, other than the fact that she had to do a lot of her own work. But she did worry about Julia, who had very Southern sympathies. And she wrote to Julia, who had just been visiting friends in Lexington, quote, "Be tender of Pa's feelings and prejudices when you go home. He is a Northern man and has a perfect right to his way of thinking. I think it bad taste in a Northern person to come South and talk abolition, and equally so for a Southern person to dwell much on the institutions of the South when in the North." Patty's father, Charles, had a very adventurous life. When he was born in New York City, but when he was 13, he ran away from home and joined the Merchant Marine. Came back at about 17, did graduate from school, studied law with his father, and became a lawyer. At about 23, he decided he was going to head west with a friend of his and look for a nice place to set up a law business. They chose Minnesota. He quickly made a name for himself, being appointed agent to the Sioux. He was an associate justice on the Territorial Supreme Court. He became very prominent in Democratic politics. During the Civil War, he was breveted captain and sent to put down the Sioux uprising, which eventually led to the largest execution in U.S. history. So he expected a lot of his children. He did a lot in his life, and he Unfortunately, was sorely disappointed in several of his children. But Patty was born with a bright red head of hair that darkened to auburn over time. Isabella took her back to Minnesota with her, though they returned to Boone County every summer. And in 1865, as the Civil War was ending, Charles decided to head out to Virginia City, Nevada, to make some quick money, he thought. Isabella followed him, leaving Patty with James and Julia for about 8 months. When they returned, went back to Minnesota, but came back in 1866 when she was pregnant again. This time the birth was not so easy. She did have another daughter. She named her Sally, after a friend of hers. But Isabella never really fully healed. Someone wrote about her being pale in Cincinnati several months later. She did go back to Minnesota, but quickly Julia was called for to help her. And she died soon after in 1866, when Patty was about 5 years old, and her sister Sally was about 5 or 6 months old. Julia, as the maternal aunt, brought both girls back to Boone County, raised them as though they were her own children. First 11 years of Patty's life were very formative. James and Julia constantly told her stories about life in Louisiana on the plantation they had. The alligators, the mosquitoes, the bayous. I'm sure they made it sound really romantic because she wrote school essays about it. Probably she picked up a Southern accent, not just from her mother, but also from her Aunt Julia, while becoming also comfortable with the racial, what we might consider racist today, and elitist attitudes of the household. Every morning it was an African American who prepared a fire, straightened her bed for her, presented her with warm water to wash her face and hands. Probably the same servant cooked all of her meals and served her tea whenever she wanted it. She learned to laugh at the antics and the morals or immorals of the poor whites who worked on the property. But she never used dialect in her letters for the poor whites like she did for the African Americans. She also, let's see. Julia, who had several beaus over her 93 years, likely also instilled in Patty some of her own less troublesome values. The importance of education, sociability, looks, and flirtation. According to Julia, once you are 30, that is about it. Your looks are gone, and she would chide Patty about going ice skating because you might fall and lose your looks. So that was very important. Other than education, most of what Patty learned in those years was really typical for a Southern girl. Oddly, neither of Julia's nieces inherited her work ethic or her parsimonious tendencies, but those were hardly virtues associated with Southerners in the 19th century. So by the time Patty was almost a teenager and leaving Boone County, she had pretty much already accumulated much of what her half-brother might have considered Southern bunk. Meanwhile, in Minnesota, her father Charles had remarried. His new wife Rebecca came with a lot of money and with a son, John, who was about 3 years younger than Patty. Charles thought this would be a great time to reunite the family, but he had a lot of trouble prying Sally from Julia's arms. Patty went a little easier. She decided to try going up and living with her family in St. Paul, Minnesota, and going to school there for a year. It didn't go very well. Patty and John fought with each other. She accused Rebecca of favoring her own son over anybody else. Might have been true. And I think she just really missed the petting and the spoiling that she got with Julia in Boone County. In December of that year, James Dinsmore died. His death left the girl so profoundly unhappy that she wrote to Julia about how good death would be for her. Quote, "I will tell you that the only way I stand it is to think that he has gone to Mama and Grandma and Aunt Susie, and that they love him as much as we do. It won't be very long before we are all together, and when I think of us all being so happy and good, I can't be bad if I try." In June, She returned to Boone County, and the family experiment was declared a failure. She continued to visit St. Paul in the summers, but she started to going to school at Miss Norris's school in Walnut Hills in Cincinnati. Her schoolmates were daughters of some of the leading families of Cincinnati. Jenny Herron, who was a sister to the future Nellie Taft, was one of her particular friends, went on to marry into the Longworth family. Another friend was Annie Wallingford, who came from Maysville, married into another branch of the Longworth family. Patty did have some behavior problems, but she fit in pretty well with these new friends. Charles, however, was not convinced of their suitability for his daughter and wrote her a really long letter about, quote, the woman of today. I'm going to quote part of it because it is classic. He found the woman of today to be, quote, a little hoydenish and too familiar with young men. The charm of a woman to a man is in her unapproachableness. Man longs for the unattainable. What he has within his grasp, he soon loses all its attractions. You will say, why this lecture, my darling? I don't believe Cincinnati and Cincinnatians are the most blue-blooded examples a young person can have. They are not to blame. They have had no ancestors. You have. You come from excellent stock on both sides of the family. And there will be no excuse if you fall into any of the frivolities of the present vulgar generation. One cannot help imbibing more or less of one's surroundings. So you must be constantly on your guard against the insidious inroads of contact with ill-bred people. So you can see where she gets a little bit of her elitist attitude. When Isabella Hill, the single woman at home, wanted to invite a young cousin to spend Easter on the farm, Patty became upset and declared she would not bring her own friends because that would be embarrassing. And Julia replied, my darling baby, it is a selfish world. Let us so live that it may be a little less selfish having us in it. We don't know how that turned out. Adulthood. When Patty finished school, she decided, unlike northern women, to have fun. Generally educated northern women post-Civil War joined causes like settlement houses or a temperance union. Patty was perfectly fine just going back to Minnesota, hanging out with her family, and becoming the belle of St. Paul. Several men followed her around, but her father made her promise not to become engaged until her 21st birthday. He compared marriage to tying a millstone around your neck. So you want to be very careful. The day after her 21st birthday, she wrote to Julia that she was engaged to Tilden Selmes. Tilden had grown up in Hannibal, Missouri. His father was a very wealthy banker there, so he knew the Clemens family. And he was a one-time mayor. He served in the Civil War with William Tecumseh Sherman. Apparently, I haven't found any proof of that. But Tilden, after his father died, Tilden took some of his inheritance and went to Yale, and then decided to move to St. Paul to start his law career. While there, he became convinced that just west of St. Paul, you could make a lot of money ranching. So he borrowed money from his mother. He used up the rest of his inheritance. He bought 16,000 acres. He borrowed money from his new law partner, trying to booster towns, hoping the railroads would come close. And he bought about 3,000 head of sheep. He later bought cattle, horses, and about 10,000 more sheep, according to the newspapers. He was president of a bank in Mandan, and when he showed up in St. Paul, I'm sure he looked like a very eligible bachelor. Patty did have a talent for writing, and when she was in her 40s, she entered a magazine contest. The story she wrote, it didn't make it, but the story she wrote was called 2 Days. Supposedly fiction, but I think it had a lot of truth in it. And it's about her and a young man from Lexington named Joe, who, even after she's engaged, she goes to visit him, apparently leads him on. He shows up the day before her wedding, still hoping he can convince her to cancel the whole thing and marry him. And then, several years later, he shows up in North Dakota where she is, and she realizes that he was her true love after all. Well, when we look at Julia's journal, Joe Humphreys, a friend of the family's, does show up right before Patty's wedding, and several years later, he is in North Dakota. So there could have been a bit of truth there. He also wrote her a letter 6 months after she was engaged. "Dear Patty, you are to none just what you are to me, and I realize more every day the greater affectionate love I have for you than I am capable of expressing in words, and shall it always make me happy." That sounds like someone very much in love who thinks he has a chance. So unfortunately, Patty was very flirtatious and apparently was leading some poor people on. I love this picture over here because behind the bench you can see a young man. And that's the young man who painted the picture and glued the little figures in there. He also apparently was very upset that Patty had become engaged to Tilden Selmes. So Patty's father, he was okay with it. He didn't want to upset her. So the first summer on their ranch, the wedding was in the parlor at the Dinsmore home. And all those friends from Cincinnati were invited. But the first summer on the ranch, in fact, the first 2 years on the ranch, must have been heavenly for Patty. She could ride every day. She brought her favorite horses from Kentucky. She liked to go hunting. 2 of the stories she later did publish were about hunting. There was no one there to nag her. She also felt like she was showing her father she could make a good decision, that it was a good marriage. Julia found Patty's lifestyle pretty wasteful. When Patty wrote that she had 2 servants, one to do the cooking, one to do the cleaning, Julia wrote back, quote, "My child, I don't think you realize poverty, or you wouldn't be thinking of keeping 2 servants in a perfect box of a house." It had exactly 4 rooms. She thought they would be tripping over each other. She suggested Patty might find housework, quote, "interesting," if you tried it. But she did invest $2,000 to allow Patty to buy more horses to put on the ranch. Within 2 years of ranching, Tilden had to move to Mandan. The winters were not good for his sheep. He didn't lose all of them yet, though. But he went to Mandan and started putting more emphasis on his law career, where he knew he could make some money. The bowstring of towns did not work, and he ended up in debt to his partner and to his mother. Then followed 2 very harsh winters, which wiped out everything. And then they lived in Mandan and eventually moved back to St. Paul. This was all very hard for Patty, who had loved that idea of independence. She also began to think she had made a bad decision in getting married to Tilden Selmes, and wrote to her sister advising her not to get married very young, because she would make the mistake that Patty did. She started to have very depressed moods, and her letters to Patty and Sally were pretty sad. She wrote once, quote, "What a world of fools and mistakes it is. It's hard to think we will go on blundering willfully or not to the end. That when the key of life is found, it is only to open the gate of death. That life is a bad business and we must make the best of it is rather a doleful conclusion for 23 years to bring. But I wish that 10 had brought it, as I think it the only philosophy worth much." Julia wrote back after congratulating her on reading books, picking up books and doing things, said, "I am so glad you are trying to improve yourself and find pleasure in it. While you are at it, please learn to spell philosophy without 2 Y's. So Tilden was never able to completely make up all the money he had lost. But before they did move back to Minnesota, two good things happened. First, Patty found out she was pregnant. I say good because today that would be a good thing. For Patty, who lost her mother in childbirth, she wasn't very happy. She wrote to Julia that she, quote, never was much stuck on living, so the thought of my lights going out has no horrors for me, but she didn't want to end up sick the rest of her life. Julia wrote back, not lifting her spirits any, quote, as far as dying is concerned, we have to take our chances in every way, every day we live. And yours are as good as anyone's. And I trust we are all better off when we do die. But the anxiety was misplaced. Patty did return to Kentucky, gave birth to a little girl she named Isabella for her own mother. And that healthy Isabella grew up to become the first congresswoman from Arizona, the only non-Roosevelt in Eleanor and Franklin's wedding party. So Julia hoped that the presence of Isabella would give Patty someone other than herself to think about. The second good thing to happen was meeting Theodore Roosevelt. He was ranching in the nearby Badlands of North Dakota and met Tilden Selmes waiting for a train to come in. He had graduated from Harvard, Tilden had graduated from Yale. There weren't many graduates like that out west at the time, so they clicked right away. He started visiting the ranch and really enjoyed the company of the family. He wrote to his sister about Patty, quote, Mrs. Selmes is really, to my mind, a singularly attractive woman. She is, I think, very handsome, though not with regular features. And, as Madame de Mornay says, she is very séduisante or seductive, like most Kentucky girls. She is very well-read, has a delicious sense of humor, and is extremely fond of poetry, including that of my new favorite, Browning. They became lifelong correspondents, and she went to the White House at least twice that we know of when he was president. Years later, he wrote to Patty, I shall think of you very often riding over the immense rolling plains with their mat of short, sun-scorched grass, for it has always seemed to me that we two felt those plains as no one else. By 1888, the family was back in St. Paul, where Patty cajoled her father to purchase a house for them. Her younger brothers had been to Europe twice, were going to Harvard and Andover, and she was quite jealous. She felt very cheated. Every summer, though, she did bring Isabella to Boone to bond with Julia, to learn to ride horses and to enjoy the outdoors. She helped Julia with the upkeep of the house, not financially, but with painting the furniture and adding her decorative touches. She became familiar with all the children on the farm, sent them Christmas presents, but during the rest of the year, Patty was up in St. Paul, enjoying dances, going to dinners, rarely with her husband. Usually she'd talk about dates with other men. I thought that was kind of odd, but apparently there were other married men up in St. Paul that left their husbands at home because maybe they did not like dancing, didn't like parties, and they went off on their own. So she left Tilden at home with Isabella while she enjoyed a very nice social life. In 1895, Tilden was showing signs of stress, wasn't feeling well, so Patty brought him to Cincinnati to go to Good Sam Hospital. They weren't able to figure it out. They sent him to Johns Hopkins, where they found out that he had liver cancer. He wanted to die in Kentucky because he was going to be buried up on the hill. So Julia set up the former office as a sick room, and that's where he died on August 1st, 1895. Julia wrote in her journal that he was buried in a patented burglar-proof coffin. So even though Boone County was kind of out in the middle of nowhere by that time, they did worry that people were going to dig them up. So he is up there. Patty decided that she needed a little time to recover. She felt really kind of out in the middle of nowhere once her husband wasn't there. So she thought about starting a ham business. She stayed in Boone County, and she sent her daughter Isabella back up to Minnesota with their servant, Julia Farley Loving, to be educated with the grandparents, because the grandparents had a lot of money. So Patty stayed in Boone County for the next 5 or 6 years. That was her main place of residence. We do have letters where she would wish Isabella Merry Christmas. She did start spending time up there, but she never really got along with her stepmother. So most of her time was spent in Boone County. She got a friend from Cincinnati to become a partner with her, and they began buying dozens of hogs. They enlisted a young African-American, Harry Roseberry, who was already working on the property, though he was only 14, to help them with their ham business. So when Patty wasn't there, Julia and Harry Roseberry would take over the ham business for her. One year they bought 75 hogs. So Julia cautioned Patty, don't tell any of the men in the neighborhood what you're doing, because they will get very upset if they know that a woman is trying to run a ham business. Patty, we don't know how well she did, but she did send hams to places like the Gibson Hotel in Cincinnati. She sent them to hotels in Louisville. She sent them to Oyster Bay, where Teddy Roosevelt was living. Somebody in the family said she sent them to the White House. We don't have proof of that, but Teddy Roosevelt did get some of the hams. She never wrote how much she was making, but it seems to have kept her busy for a little while, though at this point she did start drinking to ease her depression, supposedly, but also maybe she was just a little lonely. In 1901, Patty's sister Sally invited her up to New York City, or over to New York City, to live with her. Sally had married a corporate lawyer, did very well for herself, never had children. So they had a 4-story house on something like 56th Street Avenue, but they also had a farm on Long Island. So Patty took advantage of it. Her father Charles was willing to pay for Isabella to go to study art with a famous female artist. Isabella was already showing promise in that direction. And he also sent her to some of the best schools, Miss Chapin's, and I don't remember the name of the other lady. But that's how she met Eleanor Roosevelt. So they went to the same school. Patty enjoyed her time in New York because this is where she really got to know Teddy Roosevelt's sisters, got to be friends with Eleanor Roosevelt's godmother, Susie Parrish, and all those Macomb relatives who were still living in New York. All their descendants became her good friends. So she did write about, everywhere I go, I meet someone I know. So she was able to reinforce that kind of elitist attitude she had. Isabella had a whirling debutante season in 1904-05, and Julia Farley Loving wrote about all the young men who followed her around all the time. So they were a little bit surprised when she chose, as a 19-year-old, to be married to the 37-year-old Robert Ferguson. He was born in Scotland. He had worked for John Jacob Astor, was still working for John Jacob Astor, and they decided to get married very fast. In fact, Patty was the last one to find out. She had been in Boone County. By the time she got to New York, everybody else knew, and when she found out, she was a little upset. I think she was hoping, first of all, that Isabella would marry someone closer to her own age, but also that they'd have a little more time together, that she wouldn't get married so fast. She also wanted, like every mother, to help plan a wedding and invite her friends to a wedding. So she was very disappointed. She wrote to Patty, quote, "I feel I might just as well have stayed in Boone as far as having any part in any of it, but shall make it the object of the next few days to try and not let anyone see how I feel in any way. And don't think it will be hard, as I don't think anyone cares." So she did become a grandmother quite quickly, within a year. to Martha, and then 2 years later to Bobby. And that buoyed her spirits a little bit, but her relationship with Isabella was changed. One day after coming back from visiting Martha and Isabella, she wrote to Julia, quote, "Isabella has never given me a caress or an affectionate, loving word since she was married. And she told me last summer that our old close intimacy was at an end. I have tried to take the position of the ordinary mother and daughter, but even that is denied me. And now I am in the footing of an ordinary, pleasant acquaintance. After each time I go there, it takes me days to brace up against the pain of being made to feel my position." She felt that a lot of her issues with her daughter and with a lot of her friends was because Tilden was not wealthy. He did not leave her a lot of money. So she was a single woman, a widowed woman who had to travel around and kind of live with everyone else except for having her own house. So at the end of the letter, of course, please burn this. Julie never burned anything, luckily. It wasn't long after they were married before Robert was diagnosed with tuberculosis. They first went up to the Adirondacks to treat him there, but in 1911, Isabella moved the family out to New Mexico, where they eventually bought a homestead, the Burro Mountain Homestead. Patty would spend several months there each year teaching the children because there was no school anywhere close. But in about, I think it was 1918, Isabella purchased a home in Santa Barbara so the children could go to school. Sally, Patty's sister, built her own home there and would take Julia there every winter. And Patty usually spent her winters there. So it was like a little family compound. Meanwhile, every year Patty did continue to come back to Boone County and spend months with Julia. The Revels, a family in Burlington, named their daughter for Patty. Patty took a special interest in the girl and sent her wedding presents and other presents. She also assumed legal responsibility for a young black girl, Virgie Lee, though the girl's relationship was kind of more like a servant than a ward. Patty also went to estate sales in the county and purchased furniture for Julia's home. We believe a wardrobe and the china cabinet, both of which predate the Dinsmores moving into the house in 1842, were probably purchased by Patty at Mrs. Kelly's estate sale. Patty also sewed the nice green curtains into the 1846 library in the front hall. So she did things to beautify the property. In 1919, when Patty was driving a car through the front gate at Boone, she didn't see Julia, who was going to get the mail off the mailbox that hung on the gate. Patty slammed on her brakes when she saw the 86-year-old woman walking toward her. The car skidded over the wet grass, knocked Julia over, went up on top of her legs and stalled out. So Julia wrote that she smashed her leg but didn't break any bones. Don't know how that happens. But we found out about this when she wrote a letter to her sister-in-law, in which she opined, quote, "When my time comes to go, I want you to know how glad I shall be, how I have hated life with all its agonies, pretenses, hypocrisies, injustice, and cruelty. Hated it for myself and others. My greatest comfort is that the only being for whom I am responsible, Isabella, loves life and feels differently about it all." 3 years later, Patty spent 3 months in a hospital in Santa Barbara with pneumonia, which she never fully recovered from. In early 1923, she wrote of painful digestion, which the doctors blamed on her nerves. One of her last letters to Julia, again a complaint that Isabella doesn't think I'm sick at all just because he said nerves. She died soon after that in 1923. Her body was shipped back to Cincinnati, where it was cremated at the Cincinnati Crematorium. And we actually have a booklet about the Cincinnati Crematorium. So the Dinsmores were very interested, Julia and Patty, interested in the crematorium, even though at that time people did generally believe that you will burn your soul if you burn your body. But I think it was that fear, again, that somebody was going to go up that hill, which isn't easy to get up, and dig them up for scientific study. But the Cincinnati crematorium was one of the first in the nation. Although Patty considered her life a failure, she called life, quote, a desert of disappointment and disillusionment. After her death, Corinne Roosevelt Robinson wrote to Julia, "Oh, how Patty loved Boone and the room she had as a child, and all its memories. No one could love as Patty loved, or do for those she loved as Patty did." She was able to hide her dark moons behind a vivacious, some would say flirtatious, and I guess some would say seductive, personality, and perhaps it was her belief in her good bloodlines and her education that gave her the confidence to befriend men and women who were economically out of her league. However, I kind of think it's that Minnesota connection where she gets a lot of her future. If she hadn't have gone to marry Tilden Selmes, gone to North Dakota, she would have never met Teddy Roosevelt, never probably gone to New York City with Patty. So a lot of what came out of her life, a lot of the good things had to do with Minnesota, a little more so, though her personality was definitely Kentucky. And that's it, if you guys have any questions.
She sounded like she was pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it's hard to say, and we argue about whether, was she clinically depressed or was she just upset that things didn't go her way? Or was she drinking? So, hard to tell, yeah. But she was. Her letters are very dramatic. And I don't know if that's a sign of depression. I tend to think people in the 1800s, with all the death around them, tended to be a little more depressed than we are.
Where did they raise the hogs at on the Dinsmore property?
Well, they turned every building into a smokehouse. So the wine house became a smokehouse. They also had a boiling shed. I'm assuming where they boiled the hogs. And do you have a...
They